What if everything you thought you knew about the Madeleine McCann case was just the tip of the iceberg? This investigation reveals the other side of the story, concealed secrets, overlooked evidence, and a chilling truth that was hidden in plain sight. If you, like me, are fascinated by stories and want to uncover what few dare to reveal, subscribe now and activate the notification bell. Every investigation we undertake is a new step toward the hidden truth. We all know what happened that night in May 2007. Little Madeleine McCann disappeared while sleeping in the apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal. And since then, the case has become one of the most debated and polarizing mysteries in the world. Years of investigations, speculations, accusations, and theories followed. But today, guardians of the mystery, we are going to talk about what was not told. Because as much as Madeleine's story seems known, there is a side of it that remains buried, a side that could completely change the way we understand this case. On the night of her disappearance, makeshift searches were conducted. The police arrived hours later, and the scene was completely compromised. These are facts we all know. But what if I told you that this apparent initial confusion hides something much bigger? Why did important reports simply disappear? Why were crucial testimonies ignored? And most importantly, why do authorities still refuse to release certain documents, even 2 decades later? The truth is that the initial investigation was marked by glaring failures. Key witnesses were not heard at the right time. Evidence that could have been crucial mysteriously vanished. This all might seem like a result of inexperience or disorganization, but some believe that this negligence was deliberate. While the world debated who could be to blame, the parents, a kidnapper, a criminal network, a fundamental piece of this puzzle was carefully hidden. This piece, Guardians of the Mystery, is what we will try to unravel today. For years, we have heard stories, theories, and excuses. But there is something that has never been explained. The confidential files that disappeared without a trace. Why were these documents erased? And who would have so much to lose if they came to light? I wonder, is the truth so close that someone is willing to hide it, even after so much time? The next detail I am going to reveal could be the missing piece to understand this puzzle. But it also raises an even more disturbing question. What disappeared from those files was never disclosed to the public. Officially, they were irrelevant. But here is the problem. When you start piecing together the accounts of those involved, you realize that what was in those documents could transform the entire investigation, and perhaps even point to what really happened to Madeleine McCann that night. One of the first contradictions arises in how the Portuguese police handled the records. Initially, they promised full transparency, releasing as much information as possible about the case. However, over the following weeks, critical documents, such as the description of a witness who saw someone carrying a child near the apartment, disappeared without explanation. Later, it became clear that the statements of this witness had been partially altered before being officially recorded. Who was being protected, or perhaps who was being incriminated? Another disconcerting detail is related to the physical evidence collected in apartment 5A. In the days following the disappearance, specialized teams scoured the location for any clues. But a report issued months later revealed that many of the collected samples, such as biological traces in the children's room, were never subjected to a complete analysis. The reasons given varied: scene contamination, lack of relevance, and even administrative errors. But again, how does something like this happen in one of the most important cases in recent history? And this leads us to another key piece: the behavior of the British authorities. Despite cooperating with the investigations, internal reports suggest that there was tension between the two countries. Portuguese officials claim that British investigators acted as if they already knew what they were looking for. A clear example of this is the sudden arrival of specialized sniffer dogs sent directly from the United Kingdom. These dogs indicated the presence of biological traces that raised suspicions about Madeleine's own parents. However, there is a detail that was overlooked. These same dogs had failed in previous cases. So why were their alerts treated as indisputable evidence? Meanwhile, Kate and Jerry McCann continued under brutal media scrutiny. Amid all this pressure, publicly claimed that important information was being withheld by the Portuguese police. A formal request was made for more documents to be released, but the response was, at the very least, intriguing. Several pages of the official report had been censored, with entire sections erased before they reached the McCanns. Now, guardians of the mystery, it is impossible to ignore the questions that arise from these contradictions. If the parents themselves were calling for more transparency, why did the authorities seem to be making access to information difficult? And more importantly, what exactly was being hidden in these censored sections? Witnesses also play an important role in this puzzle. A few days after the disappearance, a tourist reported seeing a man carrying a child in the same area where Madeleine disappeared. The testimony seemed promising, but there is a detail that almost no one mentions. This witness was never called to provide formal clarification until weeks later, and even then, their account was treated as inconclusive. Why? As we delve deeper into this case, the layers of mystery only increase. The Portuguese police stated that there were never signs of a break-in at the apartment, suggesting that Madeleine left on her own or was taken by someone who had access to the key. But a peculiar fact emerges from this story. Several resort employees had master keys that could open the apartments without leaving traces. Was this line of investigation pursued? According to available documents, no. And then there is the disappearance of security camera records from the location. One of the big unanswered questions to this day is, where are the images from that night? Cameras positioned at the resort's entrance and near Madeleine's apartment apparently captured nothing relevant. However, months later, reports began to circulate that the recordings had been deleted, supposedly due to a technical failure. Technical failure or convenience? Each of these contradictions leads us to a bigger point. Why do the most basic pieces of information, those that could bring some clarity, continue to disappear or be omitted? When you look at the details, it becomes clear that there are more gaps than answers. And perhaps the most disturbing of all, some of these decisions and mistakes happened during the first 48 hours, the most critical time in any missing person investigation. What could have been found and recorded during this time was irretrievably lost. But was it due to incompetence, or was there something more at play? These are questions that, almost 20 years later, still echo. Meanwhile, we are left with the disconnected pieces of a puzzle that seems to have been deliberately scrambled. Missing reports, deleted images, ignored witnesses. It seems like too much to be just a series of errors, doesn't it? But here's the question I can't get out of my head. What if these details that seem lost were never meant to be found? Every new contradiction points to something bigger, a secret so unsettling that the consequences of revealing it could change everything. The next point takes us straight to the heart of the matter. Who is behind this silence? If each contradiction were a puzzle piece, we are facing a board that seems impossible to assemble. Censored reports, missing evidence, and gaps in police work point to something bigger, but the question remains, who is behind this silence? And the most unsettling part, why? One of the most debated theories revolves around the possible involvement of someone close to the McCann family. From the beginning, there were speculations that Madeleine could have been taken by someone with access to the apartment. How would the authorities explain the absence of signs of a break-in? One possibility that began to gain strength was that a resort employee, someone who knew the guests' routines, and had access to master keys, could be involved. However, when this line of investigation was proposed, something strange happened. The records of the employees who worked that night, including their schedules and possible movements, were never publicly disclosed. It's hard not to question, why was this information handled with so much caution? And more importantly, who would have an interest in keeping it out of the spotlight? The second theory gained traction from the British investigations. After months without concrete progress, the arrival of specialized sniffer dogs brought a twist to the case. These dogs indicated the presence of biological traces in the apartment and even in the car rented by the McCanns weeks after the disappearance. For some, this was undeniable proof that the parents themselves could be involved. The reports from these dogs were not considered definitive evidence. They were only indicative that something needed to be investigated further. Even so, this theory was enough for Kate and Jerry McCann to be treated as defendants, or formal suspects, by the Portuguese authorities. The case took an even darker turn when the sensationalist media seized upon this narrative to turn the McCanns into the target of a public trial. Meanwhile, a more detailed analysis of the alleged evidence found was never conducted. Why? Here comes an even more disconcerting detail. The official report on the biological evidence indicated that the samples were compromised, potentially contaminated by uncontrolled access to the apartment in the first days after the disappearance. This meant that any future analysis would be inconclusive. Still, the police continued to treat this evidence as if it were irrefutable. If you're wondering why this matters, it's simple. These contradictions paved the way for a complete division in how the case was handled. On one side, the British authorities focused on a possible unknown kidnapper, while the Portuguese authorities seemed increasingly interested in maintaining the narrative that the parents were involved. This division created a direct conflict between the two investigative fronts. A source close to the case revealed that the Portuguese teams felt pressured to find a quick solution to the case, while the British insisted on re-evaluating the neglected lines of investigation. But this friction only raised more suspicions. Was the Portuguese police intentionally diverting the focus, or were the British authorities covering up something much bigger? Now, guardians of the mystery, here is a point that few mention. Who had the final control over what would or would not be investigated? Some experts believe that the Madeleine McCann case quickly became more than just a criminal investigation. It became a political game where protecting certain information was more important important than discovering the truth. The missing confidential files are not just pieces of paper. They contain information that could confirm or debunk theories that continue to divide the public. For example, it is known that some witnesses who reported suspicious behaviors that night never had their testimonies included in the official reports. A classic example is the account of a woman who saw a man carrying a child on the beach shortly after 10 p.m. This description became one of the main leads at the beginning of the case, but was later dismissed when a suspect was identified as uninvolved. And here is the detail that makes all of this seem even stranger. In 2013, an official reconstruction organized by Scotland Yard brought new evidence that directly contradicted the original narrative of the Portuguese authorities. Apparently, the timings did not match, and the description of the man seen on the beach did not correspond to any previously investigated suspect. This moment could have represented a turning point in the investigation, but instead it generated even more confusion. Why were so many crucial clues ignored or treated superficially? Was this due to negligence, or was there something more sinister behind these decisions? And then there is the theory that few dare to mention, the possibility that Madeleine's disappearance is connected to a larger criminal network. Over the last 20 years, there have been speculations that the case could be linked to the international child trafficking trade. Some clues raised by independent organizations pointed to the presence of such networks in Southern Europe. Still, this line of investigation was largely dismissed by the authorities. The reason? Officially, lack of evidence. Hey, but what if the evidence was in the missing files? While these questions remain unanswered, one thing is certain. The contradictions and conflicts surrounding Madeleine McCann's case make it clear that there is much more happening behind the scenes than most of us can imagine. Every theory has a missing piece, and every conflict seems to hide something even bigger. But there is a connection that ties all these points together, a truth so unsettling that it may have been deliberately erased. I keep wondering, how far would someone go to ensure that certain answers never come to light? Let's follow a trail that could unravel this mystery, and it leads us to a place that many would prefer to avoid. If every contradiction seemed like a lost piece, the trail we are about to follow is the darkest of all, because it takes us straight to a question that many avoid confronting. Guardians of the mystery, what would you think if I told you that some of the most crucial information about the Madeleine McCann case was hidden in plain sight but was deliberately ignored? After Madeleine's disappearance, an internal document from the Portuguese police was partially released to the press. It was a detailed report on the first testimonies of the witnesses that night. At first glance, it seemed to be just a compilation of already known information, but those who paid attention noticed something strange. One of the accounts mentioned a suspicious vehicle that had been seen circulating near the resort between 9:30 p.m. and 10 p.m., the exact window when Madeleine was supposed to have disappeared. Here is the problem. This vehicle was never investigated, and more disturbing still, the testimony disappeared from the official archives when the case was first closed in 2008. If it weren't for a copy that leaked years later, we might never have known it existed. Why was such a clear clue sidelined, and who would have the power to ensure it was forgotten? Another disconcerting detail is related to the phone calls made in the resort area on the night of the disappearance. In 2013, an independent analysis revealed that there was a series of anonymous calls to international numbers made from cell phones that were near apartment 5A. These calls were never properly traced by the local authorities. Later, one of these lines was connected to a person who had already been a suspect in another disappearance case in Southern Europe. However, when questioned about these calls, the Portuguese authorities claimed that the records were no longer available. It was as if a pattern was beginning to emerge. Whenever a clue led to something concrete, it disappeared, as if it never existed. And then there is the issue of the security cameras, a point that has never stopped bothering those following the case. The Ocean Club Resort had cameras that should have captured any suspicious movement, especially at the main entrance and in the common areas. But when questioned, the resort administrators claimed that the images from that night had been accidentally deleted. If you've ever felt that these coincidences are hard to accept, you're not alone. Independent experts reviewed the location security systems and discovered that the type of equipment used only automatically deletes data after 30 days. Madeleine's disappearance occurred well before this deadline. Had someone purposefully deleted these images? And if so, why? Now let's move on to a discovery that many prefer not to discuss: the involvement of international trafficking networks. During the investigations conducted by Scotland Yard in 2014, a specific line of inquiry gained prominence. British agents identified suspicious activities in Praia da Luz related to a group known for operating in Southern Europe. A report mentioned that children had been seen in dubious conditions in the region, but this information was never shared with the public until years later. Why was this line of investigation suppressed for so long? Would following it lead to a truth that some were not willing to accept? kept. And here is something even more disturbing. A document obtained by an investigative journalist in 2019 revealed that, in the weeks following Madeleine's disappearance, there were movements of people with fake passports in the Algarve region. These individuals were connected to a group investigated at the time for crimes involving the trafficking of minors. But none of this information was included in the case's final reports. It's as if every clue that could lead to an ending was buried under layers of silence and neglect. And then we come to one of the most difficult questions. Were these omissions the result of incompetence or something much darker? We must not forget that we are dealing with a case that quickly went beyond the boundaries of a simple disappearance. It became a symbol, a mystery involving political, economic, and even social interests. If Madeleine McCann was connected to something bigger, like an international criminal network, there might have been more than enough reasons for certain truths never to come to light. And as we think about that, we cannot ignore the impact of these revelations. Every omission, every missing clue represents more than a mistake. It represents the possibility that the truth was never the real objective of this investigation. Silence, guardians of the mystery, is deafening. Now we are left to ask, how far can these hidden clues lead us? Who is really protecting what has been buried? And what could happen if these secrets finally come to light? After everything we've seen, one thing is clear. The Madeleine McCann case is not just a story about a disappearance, but about the secrets surrounding this mystery. Deleted reports, neglected clues, and a series of questions that, to this day, remain unanswered. It's impossible not to wonder, are we closer to the truth or farther away from it than ever? What intrigues me the most, guardians of the mystery, is the silence. A silence that echoes from the authorities, locked archives, and perhaps from people who know more than they are willing to admit. I always thought that in cases like this, the truth has a strange way of coming out, even when so many make a point of hiding it. Will we still see that happen here? Meanwhile, Madeleine's mystery continues as a grim reminder of how many questions remain unanswered. And perhaps the hardest question of all is, does someone really want these answers to be found? If you've watched up to here, comment, "I am a guardian of the truth," in the comments so I know you followed every detail. I'd love to know what you think. What is the truth behind these missing clues and contradictions? Leave your theories in the comments. They are always important to enrich this investigation. And before you go, I have a special invitation for you. If you enjoy mysteries like this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any details of our investigations. We're already preparing the next video that I guarantee will shake your certainties about another equally disturbing case. Click on the next video on the screen and join me in unraveling another dark enigma. See you there, guardians of the mystery, and remember, not all secrets are ready to be revealed. Until the next riddle, double asterisk.